All right, so I thought I would just send this video because I thought this was really nifty because I'm very into gadgets and tools and equipment, and this was my first time using a rotary tool, a handheld rotary tool. So it came with this kit. I tried to get all of it in the frame. It might be a bit out of focus. I currently have my phone balanced on a coaster on a mug, so when in shortage, innovate. I just wanted to demonstrate how the tool comes together because I've been working on some props for cosplay, which I will show later in the video. The first prop took me about 7 hours, but that was mostly because I was figuring out the tool independently without any videos. The instructions left a lot to be desired, like a lot of equipment, unfortunately. So I thought I would just make a video to make it really simple and easy. So this is the handheld tool. This is what it looks like. Proportions wise, it's larger than my hand, both width and lengthwise. It's kind of light, kind of heavy if you're holding it for a long period of time, especially because it vibrates due to the torque. So for those that may or may not know, torque refers to the twisting sort of rotary motion that can occur either gravitationally or within a man-made device. So you get a little bit of bumpiness when you turn it on, and that torque can cause your hand to ache over time. So it's really important to, when you first turn it on, hold it with both hands. That's at least what's recommended in the instructions. So this is what it looks like without any additional components. Sorry if my hands are dirty. I've been basically carving into hardboard using this tool effectively. So you have what's called the collet or the collet chuck. Might do a sort of a swatch hand thing so you can see it. So this is the part that clamps down, and this is the first piece that will basically go into the end of this piece of equipment. So first of all, it's worth noting that you need to make it compatible to whatever end piece you're putting in. So for instance, one of the tools that I commonly use, just some fair warning, I'm about to show a small blade item. So this is a rotary saw, as you can see here. It's the smallest one that I currently have. It's made of tungsten. Sorry, I just had to remember that. So as you can see here, it has a particular diameter. This is called the accessory shaft. So what you want to make sure is that the shaft lines up nicely and fits into the collet or the collet chuck. Now it should be a little bit loose, and that's because these segments are going to be pinched down on by what's called a collet bolt, and that's effectively going to work like a vise and just ensure that everything is stable inside of the piece of equipment because it's going to be spinning very quickly. Sometimes you can see engravings of how many spins it does per minute, and all of that is based on the circumference of the blade. So first of all, I'm just going to slot this piece in here. It should be loose, so it's important to hold the device sort of slightly upwards or at an angle, otherwise it's probably just going to slide out. Then you want to very carefully, I cannot insist how carefully you do this, first of all, you want to check that it slots in well. So we know that it's a correct fit. Other collet chucks, it's worth noting, they might have different diameters, so I'll just pick up a random one from the kit here. You can see this one has a much tighter circumference, so it would probably suit, theoretically, a much finer or smaller tool. So once you've checked that they're compatible, you then want to put on the collet bolt. Again, I'm so sorry, everything is covered in dust. So first I screw it down maybe 2-3 times, and that just ensures that it's not going to fall off. The reason you don't want to screw it down all the way is because this purpose of this component is to effectively cinch down on that metal to clamp down on the accessory shaft of this piece. These are often known as bits. So once you've screwed it down a couple times, there's a small opening. This is a bit of an awkward angle to film at, but you can see there's just a small circular opening there. So you will simply slot it in. Sometimes you have to feel around for the inside of the collet, and it should just sink all the way down. Then you want to manually screw it down with your hands as much as you can, but it will still be loose. This is where the locking mechanism comes in. So for the locking mechanism, you want to press down on this button. You want to get, usually these kits come with a particularly sized wrench that you can use. And then you just want to tighten it. So first of all, I have to determine which direction it's meant to tighten in. And usually you can determine that by just feeling it get more tense. So I've now determined that it's turning it towards myself, or clockwise, or to the left, however you want to put it. And you really want to tighten it. Make sure you don't tighten it to the point where you can't undo it, but you want it to be pretty much as snug as possible. You don't want something like this to go flying around. So theoretically at this point, you can point it towards what I would call an inconsequential space, meaning a table, a corner of your garage, somewhere that is void of anything that can be damaged, broken, or injured. And then you can just give it a little shake to make sure it doesn't slide out. Another really good way of ensuring that this is stable is this has exchangeable blades that come with it. I'll show you in a second. So these are what the blades look like. So these are the different blades. After you buy this packet, you can cut it down the sides, but obviously be warned, then there is a free opening. I wouldn't recommend doing that. If you do that, you can always tape it towards the ends, but somebody else opened this, so they cut the sides off. So you can see the size of the blades can get very large. Proportionally, that's probably I want to say 2/3 of the surface area of my palm, but that's just a guesstimate. And then you have the second smallest, and then of course the smallest blade here that we have at the very end. It's just worth noting that this kit comes with a lot of different pieces. So you have brush heads, as you can see here. You also have what's commonly referred to as a polishing compound. Then you have softer, more fibrous ends that you can attach. And I'm assuming the purpose of this is because these are commonly referred to as dressing stones or softer components, you could potentially put some kind of wax or oil on there just to treat the wood once you've finished effectively shaping or sculpting and carving it. Now, you may have seen 5-second life hacks where they're really not 5 seconds, they're more like 10 hours, and they build something ridiculous, and it's very convoluted and unnecessary. And often what you find is some of the life hacks pertain to creating sort of an extrusion in the wood that suits a screw. So I was very happy when I saw this, which is a screw bit end that you can fit into the device. So now that we've explored effectively how to piece these different components together and ensure they're secure, some of my top safety tips is ensuring that there's health and safety staff nearby, a first aid kit, something akin to that. Whenever I turn it on, I always make sure, regardless of my experience, I'm turning it on at the lowest speed and I'm pointing it to an area of least consequence, effectively. So usually downwards at the table, and then I can switch hands, and then I can change the speed, but it's all about safety. I also put my hair up and out of the way, and I have my glasses on. I would recommend that due to the noise levels of this device, you wear earpieces, so earplugs or headphones, and then also pairing it with an apron and safety goggles. So on to the arguably more fun and interesting bit. This is what I'm making. So for those of you that know Hella, she has 2 identical swords. She has necromancing abilities, so her swords look, I would describe the design of them as a cross between elven, so kind of art deco and detailed and elegant looking, and something sort of organic and space-like and futuristic. So if any of you are horror fans and you've watched Alien, you've seen that there's sort of this organic structure that's often quite lateral and smooth, and just this classic look of a lot of the props and set and character design for these pieces of media. So the most commonly used components that I've done using this is probably the saw. Sometimes due to the thickness of this hardboard, I haven't been able to fully cut through using the saw. In that instance, I could interchange it for a larger piece, but often for the sake of safety and because, as you can see, it's more about just trimming the edges very finely, what I will do is I score it. So I score it using a grid-like pattern like so. Hopefully that's helpful. I'll demonstrate it later. But if any of you are into arts, if you're doing GCSE A-level art, anything like that, and you've maybe done a pottery class or you've done some kind of clay work, you'll notice that scoring is very useful to often meld things together in that context. But in the context of woodwork, you can actually use scoring to mark out pieces and help cut, for lack of a better term, really stubborn or awkward angles. The top three pieces besides the saw that I've used is this piece right here, which is a fine point metal grit head. And then you see there's a sandpaper based head here, and then sort of I would describe it as a buffer of sorts because it's a lot more rough. You can use various different grits and so on and so forth, but if you're getting bored, I would like to show you the end result. Hopefully you won't still be bored, but I think it looks kind of interesting. So this is the end result of the second sword that I've created. It's a pity I can't get all of it into frame. I'm still working on some of the finer details, but this is what it looks like sort of at the tail end of finishing it off. I think the hilt is my favorite part. It's got a nice flow to it. It looks very organic and elven, and I feel like it's probably the most detailed part of it thus far. So when I was cutting these pieces out, I used this saw, for example, here. Always mark out what you're going to do using a pencil on wood or a similar material. The reason I say that is because even if you know the shape by heart, you might kind of start it or faintly sketch it and then realize, ooh, this is wonky, or this is asymmetrical, or actually these shapes are not the same size. So for instance, with this part, I recognized it looks like a teardrop shape. So I didn't waste any time. I free-handed circles. Then I drew crosses within those circles. Then I drew where I knew I wanted them to start and end. And then I basically just joined up the points to create, for lack of a better term, a triangle with a semicircle bottom. So this really nicely demonstrates the before and after. It can always look lackluster, and let me tell you, if you judge whatever your project is based off of how it looks during the process, I would have given up on probably hundreds of projects throughout my life. So it's definitely always a trust the process. If your project doesn't look strange or boring at least once throughout it, you're probably doing something wrong. People make mistakes. I learned a lot throughout this process, even though I have years and years of experience of working with different materials, both sort of smart materials and otherwise. But I think it's time to get started on using the tools. So fair warning, I'm going to leave the audio in of how loud it is just to demonstrate why you need to wear earpieces of some kind just to protect your eardrums. But it's also because of all this debris. As you can see, there's tiny little shavings everywhere. And I'm just going to demonstrate very quickly the scoring technique because it's a way of cutting that I hadn't used until this point. So as you can see, that was extremely loud, but the idea is that you are taking it apart piece by piece because of, like I said, safety or tricky corners. So for instance, these are very tricky corners. The way that I'd approach these is very different to the way I'd approach this. So with this one, especially with the edges of the blade, I want them to taper off. So because of that, I want to always do it at an angle. I will usually start, and this is a bit crazy, but sometimes I'll start with the saw at an angle. I will point my project at an angle because thankfully it's mobile. Not all projects will be. Sometimes you'll have to use vices or stands, or have to get creative with it. But I kind of point it at an angle, and then imagine this is the very edge of the blade. I just go in at an angle, and then I might begin to turn my project to round it off. If I want it sharper, then I'll do less turning. So I'll go at the angle, until, and I want to see a fine ledge. I want to see a very fine point. Anyways, that's the end of the video. I just wanted it to be sort of an introduction to this tool and potentially some of the techniques you can use. For this, you can see it's quite rough and scratchy, so it's very obvious I use the saw for this. I would probably then go in with a tool like this just to soften it up because I want it to look less scratchy and sort of more like a ripple effect. But you can clearly get different textures. For this bit, I used, let's see if I can find it. Probably should have prepared this before the video, my apologies. Here it is. So the way that I used this is I kind of made, for lack of a better term, dimples in the wood. So I was aiming to see semicircles, and I didn't mark them out previously, probably should have done, but you know the term do as I say, not as I do. And then as I was drilling, I effectively started to pull back. The purpose of that was A, to round it because it will be at a very tight angle that it turns in at, and to smoothen it out and ensure that by this point it's angled diagonally so that it can go vertically up the blade. Well, I hope this has been interesting or useful in some way, and now I'm going to get started on the second sword.